Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Page and I'm a graduate student at the University of North Texas. This presentation is based on a paper I wrote for a class called Information Resources and Culturally Diverse Populations. This paper was written about the need for cultural sensitivity training for librarians. Is it necessary, and why or why not? The paper was to focus on a chosen group of users, a diverse or underserved library population in an academic library. The group I have been using this semester is the Global Gateway students at my university, and specifically I've been focusing on the Chinese students in this group. In my paper, I advocate for cultural sensitivity training as a good idea for reference librarians to have in their toolkit. I believe it is a good idea for reference librarians to undergo this training either during library school or while they're employed in a reference department. The thought process behind needing this training is that librarianship is a helping profession, with interactions that are similar in some ways to those that occur in counseling, social work, and therapy sessions. These other help professions make their students take cultural sensitivity training before they enter the job market. Librarianship should join this trend by making library school students do so as well. And for those already employed as reference librarians, retroactive training should occur so the skill sets needed for culturally sensitive reference interviews become embedded in librarians working with Chinese patrons. The reasons why this training would be beneficial for reference librarians dealing with Chinese students is that these students' backgrounds and educational needs differ from those of students coming from Western educational systems. And so they need librarians who know of that different background and education. And by understanding that different background, these librarians can then help the Chinese students become proficient despite those differences. Librarianship has created some specific policy statements about diversity that bolster my argument that reference librarians should undergo cultural sensitivity training in order to work more effectively with their Chinese patrons. Seen here are the main points of the American Library Association's core values of librarianship, with diversity being one of the main points. Librarianship as a profession is sensitive to the fact that its librarians do not reflect very well the populations they serve in terms of demographics. Specifying diversity as a core value shows the profession's recognition that there is more work to do in this arena. And on this slide, we can see the diversity standards from the Association of College and Research Libraries. These standards from ACRL point to a cultural competency spectrum that librarians should aspire to move along, from a basic cultural awareness of themselves and others, to developing skills in service and language capabilities, to becoming competent as cross-cultural leaders. Reference librarians who develop a cultural awareness of themselves and then work to learn about the culture of their Chinese students will be better able to help these students with their research needs. To make my point about reference librarians needing cultural sensitivity training in order to become more effective working with Chinese students, I decided to read the research literature. I focused mostly on journal articles, and I found that the articles I found separated naturally into two subtopics: articles about the reference interview in general and articles about cultural sensitivity training. The articles about the reference interview that I chose for writing this paper focused on what a culturally relevant reference interview might look like. They focused on the fact that in general, library and information science master's programs in the United States do not require any cultural sensitivity training at all for their graduate students. Some of these articles named other disciplines and professions which do require cultural sensitivity training as part of their curricula. Some of the articles focused on the idea that librarians should learn about the mechanics of the brain's information storage, processing, and retrieval capabilities in order to help them conduct more efficient reference interviews. One article focused on ineffectual reference service to Chinese immigrants and how that can affect usage statistics, which can then affect funding for the library. Some articles focused on free and low-cost software that reference librarians can use to provide effective service. And finally, one article focused on evidence-based decision-making about which reference services are actually useful for libraries to offer for their populations. The articles about the need for cultural sensitivity training that I chose for this paper focused on librarians needing to understand that Chinese students are educated differently about using others' words, and that's why they plagiarize. Some of the articles also focused on the Chinese notion of losing face when asking others a question or having to ask for help. Librarians need to understand this tendency and help Chinese students overcome the need to save face in order to get the help they need to succeed. And finally, some articles focused on Chinese students' desire to see Chinese reference librarians and staff working in the libraries they frequent. They want this in order to have their cultural traits of deference, quietness, and respect for authority be recognized and better understood. There are some disadvantages in making librarians take cultural sensitivity training, at least in some people's minds. One very different viewpoint is that librarians should not try to be social workers. Blaise Cronin, back in 2002, says that it's political correctness fighting against being socially responsible to have librarians try to do social work type work in libraries. Other authors say that it will take a lot of time and effort to become culturally competent and that it's not worth librarians taking that additional training. And yet a few other authors point out that time away from the desk and from teaching and librarians' usual work with scholarship and service, the time away from those activities and the money to spend on the training make it not worth doing. Looking at the idea of such training in a more positive light, I feel that academic librarians must ensure their reference services are effective for Chinese students studying at their universities. Per the Institution of International Education, back in 2012, international students contribute more than $21 billion to the U.S. economy each year. So there is a financial incentive to serving these international students well. But librarians as a group are also helpers. We want to aid our students in locating information they need when they need it, and we want them to succeed in their academic and life endeavors. I believe that undergoing cultural sensitivity training is the best way to make sure we U.S. librarians better understand the cultural and educational backgrounds of our visiting Chinese students so that we can interact more successfully with them. And that creates a win-win situation for those students, for our libraries, and for our universities and institutions. Thank you so much for your time and attention.